Okay, let me share my screen for our nursing research week 13. So for this time, we'll be talking about summarizing and reporting descriptive data. Okay, so we all know that summarizing descriptive data is the first step in the analysis of quantitative research data because it is the first step. Other steps on its or other steps could depend on its careful completion. So, when descriptive data are summarized correctly, they provide useful information about the participants or the respondents in the sample, their answers to survey questions, and their responses to study inquiries. Okay. So, analysis of descriptive data entails the use of mathematical procedures or calculations, and many of which are, of course, straightforward. Pasensya na ka sa bangs ko, guys. Okay. Enough to be done with calculations, okay, or calculator. But sometimes we need the expertise of a statistician for us to be able to complete or summarize and report descriptive data. Okay. When it comes to descriptive analysis, those persons who are evaluating research as, for example, or the evidence that have or needs to, or yung mga ebidensya, okay, that have differences on their needs or to the purposes of summarizing descriptive data for your readers. Okay, so medyo komplikado yung ating lesson for today. So what we have here are a statistical analysis of descriptive data that is usually conducted to provide a summary of data in published research reports, and this data serve as the starting point of the reader to publish research reports, okay, or to begin making decisions regarding the strength and applicability of the research as evidence for practice or for specific populations. Okay, descriptive data are derived from data set, okay, that are, of course, represent research variables. Okay, so meron tayong tinatawag dito na descriptive data, and we also have what we call as this one, um, your way of summarizing descriptive data. Okay. So what are, for example, how could you summarize? Okay, how could you summarize a descriptive data? So, for example, a data set could contain variables including ages of the participants and years of experiences as a nurse, okay, and the scores on job satisfaction instruments. Simply put, descriptive statistics as numbers narratively or use numbers narratively in tables or in graphic displays for you to be able to organize and describe the characteristic of the sample. So, descriptive data are, of course, numbers in data set that are collected and, of course, that will represent, okay, the research variables. What are the purposes? Okay, what are the purposes of summarizing descriptive uh, data? Okay, so number one is giving the reader a quick grasp of the characteristic of the sample and variables in the study to understand its appropriate application evidence. And this is only our way of understanding what are, okay, the characteristic of the sample. Okay, it provides, actually talagang, ano lang to, these are objectively stated, providing basic information on how variables in the study alike, or what you call as your measure of central tendency, we'll have that later, and how they are different, or what you call as the measures of variability. And three, conveying information about the study through numerical and graphical methods to enhance, of course, the understanding of the findings. So there is no way of understanding the findings if they are not summarized for the readers. Okay. Okay. So there are also purposes of summarizing descriptive data for researchers. So number one, reviewing the data using frequency tables to check for coding or data entry errors. Okay. Or you also have here visualizing the descriptive data, particularly the shape of distribution, to determine whether statistical assumptions are met for the selection of appropriate statistical analysis. So this could be the work of the statistician, of course. And three is understanding the characteristics of the participants in the study and their performance on variables of the interest in the study, or gaining in-depth understanding before the inferential analysis. So in quantitative research po kasi, a summary of descriptive data could be accomplished using statistical techniques such as measures of central tendency, your variance, your frequency and distributions, or what you call as your correlation. And these statistics provide a method to summarize large amount of data from research studied through meaningful numbers. So you don't forget that there should be care, or care must be taken by researchers who create descriptive reports, statistical techniques, and must be selected for data that have been collected. So the level of measurement of variables is a primary consideration when, of course, deciding, okay, which statistical technique could be used to summarize the data. So there should be a careful, that's why in our lectures, I am always telling you personally or even online that you should be very careful in the um, congruency of the SOP, the title, and of course, the purpose of the study, the SOP, and of course, the statistical analysis, okay? You don't forget that when reading the analysis of descriptive data, these approaches are appraised, okay? So even more critical, the summarization of the data and the nurse researcher's interpretation of the data could be critiqued by other readers to determine the level of confidence in the findings of evidence. So don't forget that you also have readers who understand the or statistics. So you have to be very careful in the selection of statistical analysis. Classification, okay, classification of most common um, descriptive statistics. You have here counts of data expressed as frequencies, your frequency tables, your frequency distributions. You also have your mean, median, and mode as your measures of central tendency, and you have your measures of variability like your range, variance, and standard deviation, and measures of positions, I think percentile ranks and standardized scores. And of course, you have your measures of relationships such as correlation coefficients and graphical presentations in bar charts, I'm sorry, line graphs and scatter plots. So you have to this specific types of summary statistics that are applied to descriptive data are driven by the nature of the data, of course, and the level of measurement na meron tayo of the variable. And it is very important to apply as many as descriptive techniques as necessary to provide an accurate picture of the variable rather than giving only a single value that may mislead a reader. So, kailangan nga, di ba, naintindihan ng reader yan, yung ibang reader eh. For example, providing a percentage of 100% hand washing compliance for a month may look very good. But of course, if the frequency count is omitted, but then again, you have to know if that percentage would be congruent to the frequency. Okay, understanding the levels of measurement. Okay? So in here, the initial and perhaps most vital step in descriptive analysis is to identify the level of measurement for each variable, okay? So as to choose the appropriate statistical analysis. And of course, the decision is the responsibility of the researchers who create descriptive studies, and it is an important by nurses who read the research reports. So kailangan malaman din yan. Data could be collected in one for possible measurement. You have your nominal, you have your ordinal, you have your interval or ratio. And each level, as you see in the table, each level of characteristics that make it unique, and each requires a particular type of statistical technique that could be used, okay? So nominal level data are those who denote categories and have no rank. Ito yung numbers that are given to this data are strictly showing membership in category and are not subject in mathematical computation. So nominal data could be counted but are not measured, so that they could be, of course, summarized using statistics that represent counts. And summary statistics appropriate for this level of measurement are frequency, percentages, ratios, and your mode. Okay, so you also have your ordinal data. These are also categories, okay, that but have an added characteristic of rank order as being less than or greater than one another. However, because of the level of measure or the level of measure is categorical, okay? The exact level of difference could not be identified. Or for example, a pain scale, okay, in spite of its representation as a series of numbers, is an example of ordinal data. For example, while we know the score of 7 on this scale is greater than 5, the difference could be quantified or cannot be quantified, okay? For example, we cannot conclude that the difference between 7 and 5 on a pain scale is the same as the difference of a 4 and a 2 on the same scale. So we simply know that one of the numbers is higher than the other. Further, of course, we know that a measure of 5 for one patient is the same as a score of 5 for another patient. Okay. Tandaan natin that the fact that the pain scale is represented by numbers and also denotes or also does not necessarily mean the characteristic under study have been quantified. Okay. So you also have here um your interval and ratio. Okay. Your interval and ratio are recorded on a continuous scale and has equal intervals between all entries. Okay. The length of stay is an example. Data collected interval of these ratios result in numbers that could be subjected on or to many mathematical ano na yun, procedures, okay, including your mean, your standard deviation, your variance, and evaluation of the distribution or yung tinatawag nating skew or kurtosis, okay? Next. Oh, okay, you have your summarizing data using frequency. So frequency, of course, is a statistical term that it means a count of the instances in which a number of category occurs in the data or how frequent the variable occurs, okay? Here, frequencies are commonly used in the clinical settings to document the number of occurrences of an outcome. In research, frequencies are used to count the number of times that a variable, okay, has a particular value or score. A researcher, of course, may collect data on nominal level variables or ordinal level variables that and then generate a frequency count per category to summarize the data. For example, if the information about gender were desired, two values, male and female, would be collected, and the number of participants in the study who were male and the number of the female would be tallied. So frequency could be used to calculate percentages, rates, or derived variables. So a percentage is a useful summary, of course, or ano tinatawag natin, summary technique that shows the relative frequency of a variable. We also have here what we call as rate. Rate are clinically important to be calculated to provide information about data trends over time. Like percentages, rate is calculated by dividing the frequency of an event in a given time period for all possible occurrences of the event during the same time period. The difference is that percentages by definition is per 100%, whereas rates could be different, could have a different denominator, okay, such as per 1,000 patient days, like for example, okay. Next is we have here derived variables, okay. So when we say derived variables, they are created, of course, when data from other variables are put into simple formula to produce new piece of information on a new variable. An example of derived variable is the hospital length of stay. It is calculated by summing the number of inpatient days on a nursing unit, like for example, a frequency in a month, and then dividing this sum by the number of patients in the unit. Rates are derived variables that may be used to represent the effects of extraneous variables or, of course, to describe baseline performance, and operational definitions of these variables are important to include or to facilitate the consistency in the method of calculation. So summarizing data using frequency, okay, tables, interval data. So that could be summarized as frequency table because interval data could fall anywhere on the continuous scale. Each data point could theoretically be unique. Okay, so or a unique number that could be a result, or there could be many different values in the data set. Okay, which makes interpreting the data difficult. Also, we have here yung tinatawag nating interval level data. that could be or that could fall anywhere on a continuous scale. Each data point could theoretically be unique or a unique number, and this could be a result or there could be many different values in the data set. So, kung nakikita nyo to, tingnan natin kung paano niya gagawin. So, you have here frequency table. Okay, frequency table for years as a nurse. So, nagawa na niya. This one is very complex, pero it enhances the interpretation and the understanding of the values that were represented in the table that I have shown you a while ago. Although no patterns were readily apparent in the data in the original table, the review frequency table makes it clear that most of the participants in the study had few years of nursing experience. And in fact, kaya makikita nyo dito that the majority of participants had 9 years or fewer of experience. Okay. Summarizing data using frequency distribution. So you have here your bar charts and your histogram. Okay, in many ways, of course, graphical representation of data is easier to understand because the data are presented in summary fashion with colors. Ayan, yung mga nakikita nyo dyan with lines and shapes and it show the differences and similarities of your data set. So medyo nakaka-engganyo siyang tingnan, mas madali nga lang maintindihan, okay? An easy chart to create is a bar chart. So yung bar chart po kasi is for nominal or ordinal data. And most common way of designing a bar chart is to have categories of the variable in the x-axis, okay, and in the, of course, yung x-axis is your horizontal of the chart, the part of the chart, and frequency of each category on the y-axis, which is your vertical. Bar charts provide, of course, the reader, okay, with a quick assessment of which category has the most occurrences in the data set. For example, a bar chart of patient safety occurrences. Okay, these are nominal data that could show with occurrences happen the most, thereby providing information or which area should be focus of improvement or effort. So you have your a bar chart. So what is a histogram? Okay. We have here, when you use the histogram, this is a type of frequency distribution in which variables with different values are plotted as graph on the x and y axis, and the shape could be visualized. So that's the thing that you see here, okay? The histogram is the one that shows curve of the data. The researcher could see whether the data in the study are normal or, of course, are skewed, so makikita mo siya, or have an abnormal kurtosis. So based on the distribution of the data, the researcher will then select the statistical way of describing the center of the spread of the data. So this one. So here, as you see here, you have here a normal distribution. So, but some variables are, ano na to, do not have the normal distribution. So dito, a normal distribution, when we say kasi normal distribution yan, nakita nyo, it's very, ano na to, the shape of the distribution is symmetrical, meaning that the right and left sides of both, ano na to, yung distribution niya mirror the images. Again, the shape of the distribution is symmetrical in here. Okay, when we say normal distribution, meaning that the right and the left sides of the distribution are mirror images. So para magkapareho siya. So the shape of the distribution of the variable in the research study is important because many statistical procedures require assumption of a normal distribution to yield a reliable result. Okay, some variables are not asymmetric. So di makikita mo to. Okay, they do not have a normal distribution. So this one, asymmetric distribution may be described as demonstrating a skew or kurtosis. A skew distribution has a disappropriate number of occurrences in either of the right or the left tail of the distribution. So describing this type of distribution is yung tinatawag natin counterintuitive, okay? The skew is described by the direction of the tail. Okay, so this one. Next, describing the center of the spread. Okay. By of course, after checking the shape, the distribution of data, yung researcher pwede na siyang mag-select ng appropriate statistics to describe the variable center and the spread. So you have here, when you say you have your measures of central tendency, as of what I've mentioned, you have your mean, median, and mode. And then, of course, when you have your the spread of variability, you have your standard deviation range and percentiles. So when you say the mean, okay, this of course called as your average. Okay, it is called as your average. It is calculated by adding the scores in data set. Okay, by the number of scores in the data. Therefore, only data measured at the interval and ratio levels are appropriate for calculating the mean score. Okay, the mean is an easily recognized and interpreted measure of central tendency, and the mean is, however, this proportionately affected by extraneous or extreme variables. So you also have here the median. The median is another measure of central tendency, and like the mean, it is not I don't know, but it is not a calculation, it is allocation. So when you say a median, it is allocation. It is not a calculation, but it is allocation. Okay. To find the median, the values of dataset are arranged in sequence from smallest to largest, and the center of the dataset is, of course, determined by finding the exact midpoint of the data where there are equal number of data points greater than and less than the median. So you also have here the mode. So what is the mode? You don't forget that you have the mode as the measure of central tendency that is the most frequently occurring value in the data set. Some data sets will not have a mode, okay? Tandaan nyo yun. Others may have multiple modes. The mode is an easy statistic to determine, but it has limited usefulness. It is not even used in inferential statistics, and it provides little information about dataset. It is, however, the only measure of central tendency that can be applied in nominal data. Okay? Because the mean is dependent, okay? Measure of central or the center of the distribution, because it uses all numbers in the data for its calculation. So you have here an example of it. Okay, so I have here your mean, median, mode, and of course the range. Don't forget that the range is a measure of variability, that is the distance between the two most extreme values in the data set. So you have here the range is 7 minus 1, and it is a 6. Okay, the difference between the highest and the lowest, and that is your range. Summarizing the variability of data. So you have defined range, you have to have here variance. And although a typical case could be described statistically, values for individual subjects will differ, and sometimes substantially. Statistical techniques could be demonstrated or could demonstrate variability in ways that could possibly enhance understanding of the nature of the individual values represented by the variable scores. So you have here the range, of course. So you have the variance, okay? The variance and standard deviation are the most common statistics for measuring the distribution of values from the mean. Just as the mean is used to represent the center of a normally distributed data, so that the standard deviation and variance are representations of the variability of the data. And of course, the variance and standard deviation provide information about the average values, okay, the average values of the or from the mean. And the variance could be calculated using a calculator. Pwede din siyang gagamitan ng spreadsheet or statistical software. Okay? You also have here your coefficient of variation. So this could be one of the, when you say, and before we go to your CV, you have here the square root of the variance is also your standard deviation. It is more easily interpreted measure of distance or spread of scores around the mean, because its a scale is proportional to the or to the original set of data numbers and represents the data in the same way as the variance. And when you say coefficient of variance, the CV is a calculation that produces a number that depicts the standard deviation relative to the mean, allowing, of course, for the comparison of the variability of different variables measured within different scales. And the comparison of the standard deviations alone does not allow for an accurate comparison. Okay, the standard deviation is more frequently used, okay, in research reports than in variance, and it's most easily or interpreted at this moment. Variance, however, are commonly used for the calculation of other statistics, okay, such as those that determine standard error and the differences between groups. And it is helpful to calculate the list of the standard deviation value manually, okay, para maintindihan natin yung conceptual meaning. Okay, summarizing the data using measures of position. So when you say summarizing data with the measures of position, so because values from data set could be divided into parts so that readers could understand where a particular value lies, okay, in relation to other values in data set. And of course, here the percentile rank, okay, the percentile rank of a particular value lies in relation to other values in the data set. So you have here your standard scores,